All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I want to welcome you all to this press conference. I'm delighted to announce that I will be forwarding new legislation to the council in the next few days that will continue the quest to be able to reform the district's Certified Business Enterprise Program. Just so you all are clear, let me remind everybody that the underlying purpose for improving the CBE program is to create opportunities for small and local businesses in the city and to create jobs for our residents here in the District of Columbia. I assume you all will recall that last October, last year we announced a comprehensive package of reforms. Some will remember that we were outside at the city center project, which is now moving along. It may be finished before the legislation is. Actually, you know what? I think there's a good chance it will be, because it'll be finished this fall. And we've made enormous progress over there, as I'm sure you all have observed. The legislation that was passed by the council included provisions that we considered to be flawed. We didn't believe that they adequately protected against misuse of the CBE program. They resulted in increased costs, and they generated substantial opposition from the CBE community, some of whom in this room will remember. And so let me say, too, that I certainly shared a number of the goals that Councilmember Orange shared at that stage, and worked. You know, we certainly had areas where there were points of departure, but we had many areas where we agreed as well on the goals and the provisions of the legislation. Actually, I concluded that there was no choice but to veto the legislation at the time, not because we didn't want to have a program that advanced CBE purposes and goals here in the city, but because I felt that if we moved forward with the legislation then, we would have further problems that we would have to undo. And I think most of you know that I didn't take that decision lightly at all. I think, again, and certainly Councilmember Orange can speak well for himself, as he always does, but I think we both saw the urgency in formulating and approving a workable and effective bill and a CBE program that actually benefits small businesses by leveling the playing field. With that purpose in mind, I asked 17 prominent business leaders to form a CBE advisory group, and then tasked them with providing me with expert advice on a bill that would strengthen the CBE program here in the city. The members of the CBE advisory group represent a cross-section of the district's business community, and I want to thank those who are able to join us here today. Most are with us. Some, of course, couldn't be. That would inevitably be the case with the large number of people that we had on the task force. They were actually named on March 20th and began their work 2 weeks later on April 3rd. And actually, I've never seen such a high level of enthusiasm on the part of a group. I actually think they were ready to start that day, but they didn't start until a couple of weeks later. They have worked assiduously, which is a great word. I love that word. For more than 6 weeks, on an almost weekly basis, the group met to discuss how best to improve and reform the CBE law here in the city. They discussed joint ventures, which we think we've strengthened. They discussed penalties, which we think we have strengthened those as well, penalties for failing to comply with the requirements of the law. They did some work on the DC supply schedule and on the definition of government-assisted projects, among a number of other concerns. There probably are close to a dozen issues that have been addressed in this legislation. I had the opportunity to attend the last meeting that they conducted, and it was incredible. It really was a good civics lesson to watch citizen engagement in an effort, and it really should be replicated many times over because it's a great way to move government along and to get good solutions. Actually, I walked in the room. I don't even think they noticed I was there. I was sitting in the back of the room as they were in a very animated way, continuing their discussion. And they truly were down in the weeds of the program, which is exactly where they should be. The discussion that I observed and those that I was told about, and there were numerous ones, were robust, they were diverse, and they were truly thoughtful. Again, I want to commend the work that they did and appreciate the product that they have produced. Yesterday, Margaret Singleton, who is the chair of the advisory group, delivered to me a bill that was unanimously endorsed by the group that, reflects their hard work. I'm pleased to accept the draft that they have produced. I'm in the process of thoroughly reviewing it now, and really hope, what's today, Wednesday? I'm actually hopeful that we can introduce this legislation by the end of the week so that we have no delay in being able to move forward. I want to first of all thank Margaret. She is the Vice President and Executive Director of the D.C. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I want to recognize, too, that Barbara Lang, who is the CEO of the Chamber, is here with us today, who has worked on so many things in this city, and I know has a deep interest in this particular issue. So, Barbara, thank you for being here as well. And thank you for giving Margaret the opportunity to participate. I don't think we felt that there were going to be this many hours involved in this. As it got going, and there were any number of 4-hour meetings that were conducted. I think there were at least 7, maybe 8 meetings that were conducted. So if you do the math, you will determine how much time they spent working on behalf of their city. Again, Margaret, I want to thank you for the impressive work that you've done in leading this body. I also want to thank, in addition to the members of the task force, and I know you will do the same thing, the advisory body, I want to thank Rob Summers, who is the interim director of the DSLBD. I also want to thank Janine Jackson, who is our director of OPLA, who does a fantastic job. She is a ball of energy, to say the least. David Retland, who actually worked as an analyst for a period of time, he's now he's becoming a JAG, is that right? He's finished law school, and he's now in the service. Everybody know what a JAG is? Okay. It means you're in the service, all right? And also Scott Burrell, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the Department of General Services, who really did an enormously outstanding job as well. Again, I want to bring up Margaret now, but the framework, and she may talk about some of these areas, the group focused on joint ventures. We focused on the penalty provisions of the CBE legislation, on subcontracting. It focused on equity provisions and trying to separate out the equity provisions from participation in developmental services. Again, trying to make, in a number of instances, more clear provisions that are important but may have been a bit fuzzy as this law was implemented. Talked about the definition of what a local business enterprise is, the DC supply schedule, which is hugely important to the work that we do in the government, and actually abolishes the Small and Local Business Opportunity Commission, which really has been dormant for a time. It had added a layer of bureaucracy that not anyone, I think, believed at this stage was really effective in being able to administer the program. So, with that said, I want to ask Margaret if she would come up now and talk to you all about the work that she and the task force did, and then we'll go from there. Please join me in welcoming Margaret Singleton.
Well, good morning, And before I start, I want to tell and say to Mr. Mayor, I want to assure you that I have never been late for one of our CBE Advisory Committee meetings. And we stayed the course. Thank you. But it was as if anything can go wrong, and then I think it's all of this culminating is just like all of a sudden it was like, okay, everything is just all of a sudden we are here, and it just drops down on you. But it is a good feeling for all of this, I got to tell you, because we have put in a great deal of work, and I do want to say thank you to my advisory group. And if they don't mind, I really would like to ask them if they would come up here and join me as I just kind of cover what the highlights are, because I do think that you should be recognized. As the mayor indicated, we have had 7 meetings where we were actually face-to-face. For those who could not attend, they did it long distance, out of town, through conference call. I want to tell you that they put in hours in sending in their comments, their recommendations, even to the point of where I said, we can't take any more. So as the mayor indicated, we really have put in, and the group has put in, over 30-some hours in terms of looking at this legislation. I think that initially maybe he thought we were going to have a couple of meetings and that we would be through with it, but I can tell you after the first day of the meeting, it was very obvious. No, we are not going to be one of those where just meet twice, kind of give you our high-level opinions and feedback. This is going to be where we actually peel this back and we begin to look at this section by section. I want to say thank you to each of you for the support that you gave to this effort, for the commitment that you gave to this effort. I want to say to everyone that is here that we had a group of very intelligent people who were strong-willed, very opinionated, and yes, the conversation at times was what I would call spirited debate. But nonetheless, I think that that was what was all required in order for us to get to where we are today. I would be remiss if I would not, I think, repeat the mayor's thanks to his team, and that is for Scott Burrell. Scott, thank you very much. You just listened to all of the recommendations. I was impressed with your skilled ability to sit there, to listen, to take it in, absorb it, distill it, and then to come back again, to us for our next meeting with the revised and updated red line. And I'm going to... And I just want to say, speaking of red lines, that we were very guarded about the document, because I assure you that each time we had a different red line, and all we needed was for the previous version to get out, for someone to respond and react to that when we knew that we were going to have another red line version for our next meeting. So I want to say thank you again, because you did a yeoman's job. I want to thank Ms. Janine Jackson. I want to thank Janine for her insights. As the mayor had said, Janine is very energetic. She pushes her staff. I want to thank them for, the coordination support that they provided. One of the things that I think about Janine is that you can have all of this discussion that's going on, and she says, hones right in and says, well, let's look at it this way, let's look at it this way. Are we really talking about it from this perspective? And then what are going to be, the repercussions? And then, of course, it's like, well, maybe we'll have to get back with you. And she always did. So thank you, Janine. And I want to say last but not least, my hat is off to Mr. Robert Summers. There were times when I felt that poor Robert was on the hot seat. Because as we were having discussion, there would be, quite frankly, some questions that would come up that say, okay, so tell us, how does this operate? What is the current practices? And, I think those of you know that Robert is the interim director, so he's kind of just like had to step into this. And he was there. He was with us for all of the meetings. And I want to thank you for your openness, your frankness, and, and being responsive to us and to this high-spirited group as they would put some questions out there about the current program and the CBE operation. So thank you very much. So our goal was to tighten the language of the existing statute, which is called the Small, Local, and Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Development Assistance Act of 2005. And for the sake of time, I will highlight the key changes we are recommending, some of them which the mayor has already alluded to. And then we will take some questions after this to, I think to allude and to talk about any questions that you may have when it comes to some of the details, maybe as much as we can when it relates to the legislation and the revisions that we have made. The mayor has mentioned some of them, but I want to go over those and just kind of talk a little bit about the fact that we revised the penalties. And in revising the penalties, we looked at it in terms of our civil fees, fines, and we actually developed a level in where you could be fined from anywhere from $1,000 to $25,000. And that is based upon your first infraction, your second infraction, or your third infraction. And then, of course, if it goes beyond that, there are other steps that can be taken. We also, I think, wanted to strengthen the Department of Small and Local Business Development's ability to actually revoke CBE certification. So we did strengthen that in the legislation. We also looked at what happens after the fines, and then where do you go when it comes to appealing? Where do you go when it comes to looking at the findings perhaps that the Department of Small and Local Business Development has come up with as a result of perhaps a business or company that is been targeted and identified with having infractions in terms of their practices. So we looked at the Office of Administrative Hearings and giving them authority to seek civil fines of greater than $100,000 or 3 times the profits for a host of violations. We looked at in giving DSLDB the authority to seek civil penalty equal to 10% of the subcontracting shortfall for prime contractors that do not meet the 35% subcontracting requirement. So I think what we've done is to begin to say, okay, how do we strengthen DSLDB as it begins to try and enforce the CBE program? And the goal is that if we are developing legislation so that it is tight enough, it provides an incentive for people not to be in default of meeting their obligations when it comes to the CBE requirements. We've revised the statute so that the subcontracting waivers are analyzed against the ability to achieve the CBE goals on a project basis rather than within a particular subcontracting market. There was much discussion about that, and I must tell you that one of the things that they decided is that is it not that we really want the overall goal to be met about the 35%. So in this instance, while we want to be a little bit more definitive and trying to make sure that the CBEs are going to adhere to the law, we also wanted to be able to say, can we find ways that we can be flexible in helping them to accomplish those goals? We're requiring the subcontractors self-perform at least 60% of their work. Now that's a big change because originally it was 35%. And we have also separated the provisions related to equity participation at 20% of the total equity, and we separated it out to say that it must be 20% of the dollar value of the development services as well. And I think that originally in the legislation, the two were kind of combined. And so one of the things that we discovered sometimes is that when it comes to trying to make sure you're going to enforce the DSLDB CBE regulations, if you don't have the legislation that provides clarity, that so that your regulations are rooted in the legislation, so sometimes it I think creates a problem when it comes to transparency, but then perhaps maybe the transparency and the challenges with the transparency is because you didn't have the systems in place for the accountability. So that was one of the things that we were trying to do as we began to look at, okay, how do we tighten this particular section? What do we want to separate out? How do we want to apply it? And I must tell you that this group of practitioners we have, they have either lived it, they have, so they know, what that means as they begin to pull back, the curtain. And also there are those who look at it from other aspects in terms of the legal perspective. And so they also would give you their, I think, insights in terms of how and what that means when it comes to interpretation. So we look at these recommendations and amendments as the first step in the reform process. And while the amended language does not solve all issues, it adds a lot of clarity, and it will help the Department of Small and Local Business Development operate more effectively. We are fully aware that the final legislation proposed to Council will reflect what you, Mr. Mayor, ultimately feel is appropriate. In closing, I would like to thank Ms. Barbara Lang, my president and CEO, for her support of me in chairing this group. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your confidence in appointing me as chair for this effort. And I am humbled and I am indebted to you, my colleagues, and my fellow members of the advisory group for your tireless work in this endeavor. Thank you very much. And I don't know if we want to call them up for a picture after we take questions.
What'd you say?
I don't know if we want to call them up for pictures after we take
Oh, yeah,
questions.
we'll do that, yeah. Any questions? Mark?
I remember talking about the county. You said you increased how many studies
Only 2 parts? They're usually 6 or 7, and then we can't remember the first part by the time you get to part 6.
I can't remember either. What happens if people don't pay the fines? How do you enforce the payment?
Well,
Is that part of the legislation? Fine, doesn't pay it. Is then there possible, I'm thinking, I haven't read the
My
legislation.
business.
There's a thought that they can't apply for further grants, or there is that trigger revoking their possibility of fine. What is the enforcement of the payment of a penalty?
I think it's in 2 parts. And one of them is your certification can certainly be revoked. I think that when you look at the legislation, you will see that particularly around the subcontracting, it's not so much about you're not paying it, but if it finds out that you've done something fraudulent, there is additional fines as well as the possibility of being jailed.
Second, have you made an estimate of how many more businesses or
We did not do that research. We really tried to stay focused on the legislation and how we could tweak that. But I'm certain that that could be part of the next steps, but that was not part of our endeavor.
what do you expect in terms of this program to be fundamentally changed? We can do anecdotal in terms of what actually in reality is going to happen.
I actually think, Mark, broadly speaking, that it's going to create more clarity in the program. I mean, we saw, for example, what happened, unfortunately, with a joint venture situation in which there was how can I put this tactfully? There was an apparent relationship between 2 firms that then once the approval had been provided for the joint venture in the CBE program, they essentially flipped their roles. And the individual that was supposed to be the minority venture then became the majority venture. That was around Anacostia High School. And if you recall, we just, the OAG just entered into a settlement with them in which they have foregone $1 million of the 3 that they were owed, and they are now out of the program. I think it's for 30 months. So I think it will make more clear before we get to a stage like this what the consequences are and give the program itself the teeth to be able to implement those kinds of consequences quickly. Ms. Brazil? Okay.
I would like to ask Ms. Singleton and you, Mr. Mayor, a question. In preparation for this press conference, I pulled up my file from last year, and you know, a lot of the library, you guys presented a record program, and that showed a summary of it was the press conference in October 17th. And what we highlighted was
Well, let me start, and then I'll let Margaret take over. The resource issue we actually have dealt with, Ms. Brazil. I think the DSLBD had only about 20 positions. Is that right, Rob? About 20 positions. We have added 10 more. So we have increased the capacity of the DSLBD in terms of the staffing by 50%. And you've already started to bring those folks on board, is that right? Maybe half, close to half already on board? So in terms of resources, we made the commitment even before we got to this point. Obviously, the legislation will have to be reintroduced. We'll have to go through the legislative process. And frankly, by the time it's done, I suspect that they will have all the staff on board that will be needed to address the resource question. You may want to address the other 2 points, Margaret.
I think when you spoke about the enhancing the DSLDB's authority, what you will find in the legislation is that you're going to find language, I think, that is much stronger, that actually provides clear and direct authority to DSLDB when it comes to addressing some of the items that were addressed in the statute. But in addition to giving them direct authority, what we've done is that we've looked and done the drill down where we actually provide, I think, some guidance that DSLDB is going to be able to use as it implements those regulations. And so what we were trying to do is to say that there were some things that were just left too much to interpretation. So it not only says DSLDB shall and is going to be responsible for implementing these particular provisions, but here's what you need to do in terms of you just using it, engaging what you want to do.
Can I just follow up on what you just said?
Sure.
If you believe the problem has been the legislation and lack of clarity or questions of interpretation, how do you address the issue that you have ongoing investigations, whether or not by journalists or ongoing investigation by the FBI and U.S. Attorney as we speak, serving subpoenas on CBEs in the District of Columbia for records? So this is testimony from CBEs. And the problem is one in which you have CBEs who've said they're based in the District of Columbia, said they're doing business in the District of Columbia, and all you need to do is get in your car and drive to where their so-called corporate office is, and it's not there, or the majority of their business is not being conducted there. They might have a lone person sitting there, but then you go to PG County or to Montgomery County, and that's where their true office is. So I guess my question to you, Mr. Mayor, is when you hear about this press conference, you think that this legislation and the work of the task force is going to fix what's broken in the CBE program. But what's broken does not take a rocket scientist to fix, but moreover, my question is, you have DGS, the Department of General Services, sitting right over there, and they're the ones that authorized Forrester and EEC to have this so-called joint venture that Mr. Nathan then cites in his settlement agreement and says it was a bogus joint venture. What do you say in terms of the city actually rolling up its sleeve, saving millions of dollars, and the false impression that this legislation is somehow miraculously going to fix what's broken?
I don't think we consider ourselves, nor the task force considers itself to be a miracle worker. I think that there is a process of rolling up one's sleeves, and now we have 50% more capacity to be able to roll up our sleeves just in terms of who will be working in the office. We also, you all may recognize that during the budget period, we had interactions with the council around what will go on in the auditor's office. I guess without going into a great amount of detail, what I expect is a lot more compliance work, because that's where some of the problems lie. This is what we saw with Forrester. Not to single them out, but they are the most evident situation at this point, and that is, I don't know, it may be the most stringent set of penalties ever meted out in the CBE program in the city. $1 million is a lot of money, and to be able to not participate in the program now for 2 years or more is a very substantial set of consequences. With more people working in the DSLBD, we will have a greater capacity to be able to do that. And frankly, you will recall that the compliance function actually was taken out of DSLBD and put in the auditor's office. We intend to be able to repatriate those functions now so that compliance is operated out of DSLBD, and there will be a cohesive approach to how we approach the program. I think while it was well intended in the beginning, I think separating compliance out, from certification and enforcement really created a problem because there were too many entities involved in this. So we will see. This is one of those where I think we're taking steps forward. We do have clarity in what's expected of people who are in the CBE program. We have more hands, more minds that will be involved in the enforcement. And if there's continued tweaking of the program, which I'm sure there will be as we go along, we will be prepared to do that. But we'll be prepared to do it in a systematic way, not every 3 or 4 or 5 years in the wake of an issue that may arise that, like the situation with Anacostia High School.
Are you aware of the Attorney General's any other investigations as regards fraudulent activity in the CBE program? And are you aware of the ongoing federal investigation of the CBE program at District CBE?
I don't think I'd be at liberty, whatever I know, I wouldn't be at liberty to talk about that at this stage. I talked about the Forrester situation because that's been settled now. Other investigations, I think it would be ill-advised to talk about those.
You and your office haven't been served with a subpoena?
I haven't not been served with a subpoena. We've been served with a subpoena? As far as I know, we haven't. Patrick.
The bottom line is, how many people or compliance officers will now be going around checking to make sure that businesses are actually based in DC? Because that seems to be the reoccurring problem.
Yeah, and again, let me make clear, the auditor has a role in this. If you all go back and look at the budget, we actually, the 4 positions that were given to the auditor's office to do this were retained in the auditor's office. And then we've added 10 more in the positions in the DSLBD, in the Department of Small Local Business Development. So as you look at compliance, make sure you add those 4 positions into that as well. I think we had only, one person working on this? And how many more will we be adding for compliance?
Yeah, we currently have added some more, so we'll be hiring 5 more additional people to get us to that.
So it's a 500% increase over the one that we had. And they obviously were completely overmatched. We're talking about upwards of 1,100 certified businesses, is that right? So completely overmatched. I mean, if they did 3, to be able to do once a year with that capacity, they'd have to do 3 a day for 365 days a year, which is obviously ridiculous.
I mean, you just mentioned, 1,100 or 11,000?
I think it's, I know you can go on and speak to it if you want to, Rob. I think it's a great start. If there more are needed, I think we'll be prepared to add additional resources, but we think, Patrick, this is a good start to be able to get this program on more level footing.
And just on the
Let Rob address it.
Yeah, no, so we will have 10. So we just currently have 5 now. We're still staffing up. So we feel 10 will be sufficient to get us to take a look at all the CBEs and just to make sure that we can try to catch, or not catch, but just make sure that everything is as the CBEs say that they are.
And how do you determine if a business has principal office physically located in DC? What are their specific parameters?
They're a bunch of checkpoints. So if their business decisions are made at that office, if on a daily basis, this is some of what the legislation is speaking to. So if their primary efforts are taking place in that office, if the decision makers work out of that office, if we look at their files, and a lot of their files are in that office, if payroll, things, there are a laundry list of things that we look at just to make sure that the headquarters is in DC.
I wouldn't discount the effectiveness either of having seen something like just what happened. You know, just put yourself in someone's shoes who says, "Wow, somebody just got hit with $1 million fine and has been eliminated from the program for 2 years plus." That's going to make people think twice or 3 times about whether they do something that may be untoward as well. Mark.
What is the requirement of CBEs?
1,100.
1,100.
Yeah.
You said 11,000.
I did.
1,100.
Did I say 11,000?
sorry, repeat the
Is
question.
there a requirement to get a CBE to hire DC residents?
Yeah, there's a,
Percentage of DC.
sure, and there is a percentage, and a lot of it is going to be based on how big the company is. So depending on the size of the company will determine the requirement of DC residents, but
The minimum,
at least 50%.
at least 50%.
Yes.
And have you done a statistical study of what is the average of hiring DC residents of all of the 1,100 CBEs?
Yeah, not to that level, but as we're building our staff, we're looking at all types of ways and measures to see what the CBE program consists of and how robust it is. So things like that we're currently taking a look at.
And if somebody doesn't hire 50%, then that triggers a penalty?
Well, prior to becoming a CBE, then
No, afterwards. How about they get a CBE and then they disregard the hiring requirement and DC residents don't benefit?
Sure,
You now have action to remedy that situation.
at that point, that's when the compliance team will go out and look at companies, and then based on the information they receive, then that's how we can make those determinations.
Or have any company present been strict, levied penalties based on that? What I'm trying to get at is the whole point is to hire DC residents besides
Sure.
just have
That's a good point.
DC businesses. Have any businesses that have CBEs been sanctioned or penalized for not fulfilling that obligation?
Well, no, and I think as the mayor pointed out, we've had one person, so that one person did not have the capacity just to do that dig down.
One incident where they have been penalized.
Do you really know?
No, I don't know.
I don't know that we really know.
Okay.
But I know what we do know. We know that we've been completely overmatched in this. When you talk about one person engaged in compliance, again, to use Ms. Brazil's term, it doesn't take a rocket science to realize that you are completely unable to carry out the mandates of the program. So a big part of this is resources. Also being able to make sure it's clear what the law says in the first place. But once you know what the law says, you got to be able to have the people who can go out and enforce the law. And that's what this compliance effort is about. To be able to add 10 people, isn't necessarily in and of itself a huge step forward, but 10 people on top of a staff of 20 is a 50% increase in capacity.
But I'm getting to the core purpose of this program is not to just have DC businesses, which is wonderful, but also that these DC
Yeah.
certified businesses hire DC residents.
Yes, and we don't disagree with that, Mark. I think you were asking the question, though, how many instances have there been? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that Rob knows the answer to that. If you want us to try to research it, we can. But where does that leave us at the end of the day? I think we are stipulating to the fact that this program's resources have been grossly under invested, if for want of a better way of putting it, in terms of what the needs of the program are, especially when you look at the level of dollars at stake here. So we're simply trying to level out.
How much is, what are we talking?
In terms of CBE program, how much is tens of millions of dollars, obviously, right? Tens of millions of dollars. We'll get a precise figure for you if you wish. But again, it really is, the intent of the program is more than worthy, because it really is trying to help small businesses in the District of Columbia that themselves may be under-resourced be able to get a foot in the door to be able to do business in the city. And in some instances, it's been taken advantage of. And that unfortunately washes up on everybody when that occurs. So what we're saying is we have strengthened the statute that governs this program, and we are now putting in place more people, already putting in place more people who will be responsible for making sure that the statute is properly enforced. One last question. Wait a minute, you have an answer. Who are you with?
Wilson on the city.
Okay.
You mentioned the Forrester situation.
Yeah.
And in that, we saw the contract awarded by outside firms under City Administrator Alan Liu. And at one point, with trouble starting the Forrester, one of those outside firms suggested using $250,000 of public money to sort of smooth things over. And we found out, in general, there's fraud in this situation. So do you have any plans for the contract awarding under City Administrator Alan Liu? To change that or move it back inside the city?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Okay. So like McKissick and McKissick, Lethbridge and Ludwig.
They're right in front of you.
Okay, if I could ask you a second question. So we, part of this panel, you have Rod Woodson, who's a lobbyist for Forrester. And I'm curious, obviously they just settled the situation with the Attorney General's office. How can the people of the city be convinced that these rules are going to help perform CBE when you have people who were just settled for fraud?
Well, you know, we've kind of covered this territory before about the advisory body. I happen to appreciate the fact that the folks who were on the advisory body agreed to do it. I happen to think that they're experts. They're people who I've known for years, who I have confidence in. And remember, at the end of the day, this is legislation that I am transmitting. This is legislation for which I will be responsible, and I have every confidence in the work that they have done. I wish you had come into the room and watched them working and listened to some of the deliberation. You probably wouldn't have even asked the question if you'd heard that. So I don't have any reservations at all. You know, and for those who would raise questions about legislation, how many bills get introduced down here that were written outside of a process that we put in place? You know, there's lots of bills that get introduced into this legislative body, and every legislative body for that matter, that have had the, they've had the involvement of people who are interested in the issue. That's the nature of democracy in the civic process. Last question.
Can I ask the senator a question as regards, how did the task force conduct its business? I know you state that there were 7 meetings, open to the public, but as I wrote to you in an email, the public had difficulty finding out about the meetings because they were never posted on the government website, and you had to go through the minutia of realizing it was in the DC Register. But my question is, how did this task force conduct its business? Did you look at best practices across the country, or did you consider the experts and the advice that you sought and received, those individuals on the task force?
I'll address the first question about how do we conduct our business in terms of meetings. We started out with a set number of meetings that we did that were published in the DC Register. As we began to work through this, we realized that it was going to take additional meetings. We then identified those meetings, and then they were also published in the DC Register.
Why not on the DC government website, especially the page that was devoted to CBE reforms? Why didn't you post the notice of the meetings on that page?
Well, I work with the administration, and I'm sure that they had their reasons for why they wanted to post it.
Okay.
Because the open government requires all public things to be published in the DC Register, and as we explained in the email to Mr. Joe, this actually was not done, it was government supported, but it was actually run by the CBE advisory group. They're not an official working for the government. That's the reason why it's not published on the CBE reform website. Open government's statute requires publication.
Let me just say this. We can get into all the nuts and bolts of this. There was every effort to be as transparent as we possibly could. In fact, we had people that came in. There were at least 3 firms I know of that came in and participated with the advisory group and testified. We have run all of our task forces that way. We've actually had a designated period at the end of every meeting of a group like this where people who were not on the task force could come up and speak about whatever issues they chose to. That was for those who remember the PEPCO undergrounding issue. We had, wait a minute, Ms. Brazil, I wasn't finished. We had an open period where people could come up and testify. And
That's your job. I think that's what you're being paid the big bucks for.
we're done. Thank you all very much.